Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar where we'll discuss an insider's perspective on surviving a cyber attack. With all the new high-profile hacks in the news daily and with more concern than ever surrounding cyber attacks, now's the time to consider what you can learn from previous attacks and how to ensure the survival of your business. So let me tell you a little bit about our host organizations today. Bernard Global is a security consulting and advisory firm that covers every angle of risks to businesses. They specialize in protection of people, data, and property, including crisis response, cybersecurity, insider threats, BCP, CM, executive recruiting, and advising senior management. RSI Security is a premier managed IT security and compliance advisory service provider. We have professionals for all cybersecurity and compliance needs, from data privacy to PCI, healthcare data compliance, cyber defense, penetration testing, federal programs, and more. These are just some of the services that we specialize in as a full suite cybersecurity solution provider. We work with some of the world's leading companies, institutions, and governments to ensure the safety of their information and compliance with applicable regulations. Now I will introduce you to our panelists. Stevan Bernard founded Bernard Global in 2018, and he serves as the chief executive. Prior to this, he was the executive vice president for global protection services at Sony Pictures Entertainment. His staff covered over 50 countries and 150 offices. Some of his critical responsibilities included threat management, investigations, forensics, information security, and data privacy. Also threat management and incident management and content protection. Stevan's public service included 12 years in municipal police and 3 years in the US Army. Today, Mr. Bernard is engaged with the law enforcement community, the US Department of State, the Domestic Security Alliance Council for the FBI, and InfraGard with the FBI, just to name a few. He's been recognized by the CIA, the FBI, the US Army, and the US Department of State for his service. John Shin is the managing director at RSI Security, and he has over 18 years of information technology and cybersecurity leadership experience working with highly regulated industries across the board. John works with organizations to assess and improve cybersecurity strategy and posture. Some of RSI Security's notable clients include Samsung, Verizon, Epic Games, state and city governments, and military and defense organizations. John is also the author of multiple research papers for the US Air Force Research Laboratory and others. Dylan Kelsey has over 8 years of experience working as an analyst in the Navy in support of the NSA. In addition to having his Security Plus certification, Dylan possesses an extensive background in computer information systems, intelligence analysis, and quality control and compliance. So before I pass it off to our moderator, I just want to go over a couple quick FAQs. For any questions that you have throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to use the Q&A to submit all of your questions throughout. Also, you'll receive a PDF with contact information and some key takeaways that you'll learn in this webinar and your CPE certificate tomorrow, all via email. So keep an eye out for that. Now I will pass it off to our moderator, Dylan Kelsey, to get us started.
All right, thank you, Eileen, and thank you and welcome to our guests and our speakers here today, Stevan, John. Surviving a cyber attack is really a topic of interest lately. I think it's at the forefront of a lot of business owners' minds. We see it in the news more and more. So we've got a really unique opportunity today here with you, Stevan, to gain an understanding of what it's like going through something like that. But before we get into the hack, why don't we talk about what you've been doing since retiring from Sony about 3 years ago?
Thanks, Dylan. Thank you, John and RSI. Really my pleasure to be able to join you and this audience. I have to make a caveat speech, my legal speech. What I'm going to offer and share with you today is based on my experiences, my views, not necessarily those of Sony, not intended to be. So it allows me to be a little more candid with you, which is really important when you think about, what you might face in a cyber breach. And the title of this, I think, is interesting because it's surviving one. And that's the way we need to think, that we are going to have one. And the question is, are we prepared? Are we going to be able to survive? So what have I been doing? I retired in July of 18, 3 years ago almost. And I launched a security consulting advisory business globally. And little did I know how much interest there was going to be in the cyber realm, if you will. And I did have the CISO responsibilities. I had a really strong team around the world reporting to me, thankfully. And we dealt with a lot of issues. One of them was the North Korea attack. But I probably have done webinars and podcasts and national meetings, over 200 of them around the world since I retired. And I would say that probably the majority of those are on cybersecurity stuff at academia, universities, with the federal government, several different branches, Wall Street Journal, and so on. So I think I'm fairly well rehearsed and versed in this. And, I do think it's really important to share the experience because so many victims don't. And that's what I intend to do today. So this is a great platform for that. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we're glad to have you here. So what can you tell us a little bit about your 16 plus years as the executive vice president while at Sony?
Well, it was a role that evolved. When I went to Sony Pictures, the business was basically analog with big print reels, and that's how you moved your media around the world. And then obviously it shifted to digital, and the business became much more global. The box office went from the majority being in the U.S. to the majority being outside the U.S. Majority of revenues. So I saw a major transition there during the time that I was there. But I also saw the appetite for content significantly increase. And I have to say that our view in this business was that the First Amendment counts, meaning that we have a right to produce and prepare and issue media as we like. And that's what we did. And we stood behind that. So I was able to form at Sony Pictures a truly converged model where I had all of what was described by Eileen earlier under one roof. And it really worked because the day that we had the breach in 2014, the crisis team came together, in moments, and there was not a lot of debate over who was going to do what. We had already pretty well defined roles. People asked me, did you prepare for this type of a scenario and the severity of it in your planning or not? And my reaction to that is we prepared as best we could, but we never thought that the black swan would show up. And it did. And so what I mean by that is that on day one, we went dark worldwide. And when we did it, our adversary didn't do it, although we would have had all of our data destroyed had we not unplugged worldwide. But that decision is a huge one. And in your planning, I have to, if I don't say anything else to you today, when you sit down and begin to plan and prepare for hopefully worst case scenarios, consider whether or not you could unplug worldwide, what the impact of that would be, who would make that decision. And by the way, if it's Thanksgiving week, who's available to make that decision? Because it was for us. And then how do you manage through that? And then, so now you've done that, you've stopped the bleeding for a moment, but now you've got the incident to manage, but you also have the business to run. People forget that, right? Oh, everybody runs into the room and want to manage the crisis. Okay, yeah, we've got a team to do that, but the rest of the company needs to focus on running the business in a totally different way. Imagine running your business without the internet, without being connected today. How do you do that? How do you make payroll? 50 countries, 150 offices, plus thousands of production people all over the world that we had to account for. And anyway, I'm sorry, I can run off all day on this stuff, but that's some of it.
No, that's good. And I mean, speaking of decisions and that, day one, how critical are those decisions that you make on that day, when the attack happens?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just reemphasize it one more time. Day one decisions, what you do day one, I'll put it that way, is really critical. And it can be the differentiator between whether or not you survive it or not. So another decision that we made that was also pivotal was we needed help. We pretty well figured out who the adversary was. We knew that it was a nation state. And so, you know, what opportunity did we have or authority did we have to do anything outside the United States, really to do anything in the United States from a criminal, you know, standpoint? And this was a crime. Very little. Civilly, okay, yeah, but civilly is recourse later. You know, you're in the heat of the moment, you're trying to save yourself. So we agreed that we would bring in the FBI. And part of the reason we did that is because the FBI has a legal attaché program where they have agents in embassies and consulates in over 90 countries around the world. And not that they have any more authority, but they have are relationships with those host countries where they can influence outcomes and decisions. And they really it made a huge difference. The other thing that happened that we didn't really have anything to do with, but the Department of Justice has oversight of the FBI. And so the DOJ in the background was doing all kinds of things in support of a legal process, an investigation as to what happened. And so when the Bureau came in that afternoon, I had 6 of their guys from the cyber team in the LA office, one of whom was South Korean, who had been there for Dark Soul, who actually, not that day, but the next day, I think it was, began to look at the malware and recognized it was the same malware that was used in Dark Soul and actually later on in the Bangladesh bank attack and so on. So, and I don't want to say this, that another unintended consequence was that in pulling the plug worldwide, this malware was a wiper malware. The intent was to destroy all the data, thus destroy the company. And because we froze it, we also froze the evidence, because as they destroyed the data, the malware went away too, right? All evidence would have been gone. But we were able to preserve the malware by doing that. So another benefit. But how important was it? An unprecedented thing happened. So this was November 24th, 2014. On December 19th, Director Comey of the FBI and the President, Obama, made attribution to North Korea. We never said it was North Korea. It wasn't our place. They did. And if you think about it, they never would have or could have had we not done what we did. And being able to preserve the malware, the evidence, if you will, let them analyze it, not us. So the fact that we had the Bureau there, it gave us an independent view of who did it, what they did, how they did it. And if you have any interest at all, there is online an affidavit that was unsealed after 4 years. It's 190 pages long that was provided by the DOJ and the FBI on everything that happened, how they did it, how they planned it, how they orchestrated it, who did it, and there's indictments that came from that as well. So huge benefit. And I know that the flip side is your general counsels are sitting there saying, oh my God, we're going to lose legal privilege if we bring in law enforcement. And today, it's not only the Bureau that can help you, it's DHS, it's Secret Service, and other agencies now that are far more capable, perhaps than they were before. But whoever it is, and they coordinate pretty well between each other. So it's really important in your day one planning to make sure you include that. And don't be shy or concerned as much about bringing in law enforcement. They're there, I think, to help us, not to harm us. More than ever today, that partnership is strong. And so, but you don't wait till that day to pick up the phone and dial 911 and say, hey, got a little problem. You get ahead of it. You join InfraGard, you build relationships, you go visit your local FBI office or have them over for lunch. But you want to begin a dialogue ahead of time. So I'll stop there. Go ahead, Dylan.
Thank you. No, that's really good. I want to circle back a little bit to, you had mentioned the intent behind the attack. What do you feel was the intent, and do you think they accomplished what they set out to do?
Well, in any cyber breach, I think the instincts of senior management are contain it, segregate it, get rid of it. We got a business to run. And that can be your failure, because there's all types of attacks. There's APT attacks that are usually to steal your secrets or espionage related. There's the bad guy, the insider threat, those that are intent upon destroying your business. What was behind this one? There was a great deal of anger, I think, that came out of North Korea as it related to a film that we made that we were about to release called The Interview. And they did not want that movie to ever be released. In fact, the DPRK wrote a letter to the UN and another one to the president, I think several months before. It was in June of 14. And they said that if Sony Pictures releases this film, we consider it an act of war. Think about act of war, cyberspace, what's going on today. Where is the red line? That's a whole other conversation. But I think their intent was very angry, very capable to destroy us. But not only destroy us, they stole a lot of our data. They exfiltrated a bunch, 5 movies that hadn't been released, the Bond script that had been approved, but the film hadn't started yet. And these things were put on Pastebin. And the top 10 executives had emails going back 10 plus years that were posted on Pastebin. Everything, attachments, contracts, whatever, salary information leaked, all kinds of data leaked. And that was to embarrass and punish and defame. So not only satisfied with destruction, it was more. And so the parallel that's really interesting here to ransomware today is that you're also seeing it. You know, public shaming it's not only a threat in some of the ransomware extortion attempts, it's actually happening. And we'll get into ransomware, I think, a little later, but that's a whole other topic. But I will say to you that the parallels between, you know, the type of malware that was used, the tactics, everything is very similar. What happened in 14, what's happening today. And by the way, the malware is for sale on the deep web. And by the way, did they accomplish what they set out to do, was your question? And the answer is no, but they damn near did. Had we not been who we were, and with the right team in place, we'll talk about team tactics and style, leadership, and so on, but I don't know that we would have made it. I really don't, because it was every day there was a new tactic, a new, you know, set of stuff that hit us. And then, you know, the other thing that I just mentioned quickly is that if it's a high profile attack, the world, social media, online media, print media, all media, and you can call yourself media and never be media, the speculators, the rumor mills, the clock never stops running. And it's a huge distraction that you have to have somebody deal with, but you have to deal with it separately from the crisis.
That's an interesting point, actually. So when you talk about business continuity and crisis management, I guess this is a 2-part question. Is that something that would be included in something like a business continuity plan? And how important is having a fleshed out plan like that really in a scenario like this?
Yeah, what I find today is a lot of companies have DR, the disaster recovery plans, but they're more for, you know, IT resumption or IT continuity during an attack, right? A cyber attack. Mm-hmm. But what they don't have, many companies don't have yet today, is a true crisis management program. It's not just for cyber. It should be for any type of crisis. And by what I'm getting at here is that everybody has a different role and a different responsibility, not only functionally, but individually. So, like I said, when you come in the room, it shouldn't be a debate or worse over who's doing what. But to give you an example, communications function in an organization. There are probably 8 different scenarios that I could lay out for you that are all different, and the requirements and needs for them to communicate. So one is, who are the victims? Victims are oftentimes employees, right? You forget about that. And that it creates a chill, uncertainty for them. Victims are your clients, your shareholders, your third party and fourth party providers. And the list goes on. So the point is, though, in communications, you can't say one thing to one person and another to another. You have to have consistency. But the messaging is also different. So what do you tell the SEC? You know, what if you're a government service provider? When do you report it? So there's a whole litany of stuff that when you break it down functionally, and I've done this for companies, really interesting. I did one for the audit department of a large company. There were 40 people in the audit department. And I talked about their role in a cyber breach. And there are a lot of things that they hadn't thought about. So we don't have enough time for that today, but that's really important. That's how you complement and really build a true business continuity and crisis management program. The other part of that, though, I want to mention is the other thing we had done is business impact analysis. We had hundreds and hundreds of applications. So when you go dark and then you think about, all right, we're going to come back. How are you going to come back? Which application is the most important to which one is the least important? And who makes that decision? And if you've already done your homework ahead of time, so at least your functional heads, division heads have already identified 1, 2, 3 through 50, what's most important to least important. Then you can come in a room and pretty well decide as it rolls up into the pyramid of this is the most important and get it done. So doing that in advance, really important. I also at Sony, I had sustainability, and my guys said, don't print those documents. They're all available online digitally. Not when you go dark. Thank God we had printed them. So just a little tidbit.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that actually. John, did you want to chime in on the business continuity plan and crisis management?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Dylan, for moderating this. And Steven, such an honor to have you as a panelist. Thanks for being such an enduring partner for a long time with RSI. I was born and raised in Korea, South Korea, I should say. Yeah, I'm here as your friend, not as a foe. And this is really important topic for me personally as well. So thanks for being here. So Dylan, a question on the BCP. It's very important. Let me kind of share some stats here. So insurance companies ran a survey last year on businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, and 48% businesses say that they don't have a BCP. But if you ask the question differently, are you prepared to deal with a ransomware? 95% say yes. So there's this huge disconnect because a lot of businesses think that, yeah, we have cyber insurance or we have everything's in the cloud. Those are type of a false sense of security that really affecting this type of opinion. So it's very important to have this. I cannot state that enough. But one tip that we usually share with our clients is that actually run it. And you don't actually have to run it. Your cyber insurance agent, your lawyer that you work with, critical service providers, they're happy to get together once a year or a couple times a year and go through the scenarios together and actually see how that works. The first thing that's going to break down is communication. Like, who do we call? I mean, if that's where the breakdown happens, this is not going to work. So as to Steven's point, having the communication and know what to do first is so critical, especially during crisis.
Okay, yeah, thank you, John. Speaking of the business continuity plan and assigning roles, Steven, this is a question for you. How do you distinguish those functional roles from, say, operations and investigations in the continuity of your business?
Well, you need to, but I would say that in your planning, if it's done right, it shouldn't matter what the scenario is or what the incident may be. But what you need to realize is that not necessarily all of your operational areas will be impacted. So those that will be or are, you want representation in the crisis team and in the crisis room, right? Because they're directly impacted and they need to know everything you know, so they can make good decisions on, the continuity of their business and resumption. But I think, as I said before, the better able you are to isolate the crisis, have the right people and functions at the table, decision makers included, the better able the rest of the business is to continue to run their business. It may be in very different ways, but that's what you need to do. And I'll give you an example too. We didn't need to have our CEO in the crisis room 16 or 18 hours every day. We needed to have the availability of the CEO to make certain decisions that were really big decisions that affected the whole enterprise. But otherwise, he had the confidence in us to do what we needed to do. And so I think that was really important. Sometimes you think, oh, I got to have all the leadership there all the time. And no, actually, you don't. You need, and that'll change, by the way. It'll continually change who you need and who you don't need. And you figure that out. And I think people are very good with that once they understand the why.
Thank you. In terms of, getting hit with a cyber attack and feelings, what does that feel like when you get hit with a breach?
I think probably a good way to describe it is you never think it's going to be you. Even today, with everything happening, oh yeah, it's the other guy's problem. And all of a sudden, it's your problem. And you know what? The deer in the headlight, the panic mode, you freeze, you don't know what to do. It's because you don't have any plan and you never really thought through it. So planning is so important. Having a written plan, whatever, I think because that needs to be refreshed all the time. But it's the planning and the conversation that's so important. But yeah, you're shocked, and it's so depending on the magnitude of the incident, right? It's so complex in how you have to deal with all the various aspects of it. And then when they keep throwing new stuff at you, the way they did it to us is almost like, John, you talked about doing tabletop exercises and scenario planning. In those, every 30 minutes, you hand out a new one-pager and there's, oh my God, this just changed. And now we've got to do this. Well, that was real for us. It was all the time, just, the onslaught, if you will. And like I said, you got to be careful not to be overwhelmed by that. But I think once we caught our breath, what we decided is we are going to do everything we can to survive this, and all hands on deck. Except what I will say to you is that you have to pay close attention to all hands on deck, because this type of a battle, if you will, is not for everybody. And it's okay. If some people just aren't dealing well with it, give them a different role. Get them out of there. Bring somebody else in. And then also I had guys that brought cots into their office and worked 20 hours and slept 4. That's not sustainable. It was certainly, to be appreciated, but it wasn't sustainable. So we brought in additional help. For example, at the time, we decided that we did need additional forensic investigative support in addition to what the Bureau was doing. So I got a hold of Kevin Mandia, and we brought in Mandiant, which is now FireEye. And it was a great decision. We brought in EY, we brought in PwC, we brought in Deloitte, and we brought in others. And here's my thought on this. You can always bring too many, but never want to be in a place where you wish you would have brought more and you didn't. Right now you're in trouble. And because if you bring in too many, as you begin to sort through it, maybe you didn't need, X, Y, or Z. Okay, go home. Thank you. But there's a role for everybody. And that was the way we supplemented and augmented and supported the team so they could actually, have a time to eat a sandwich or catch their breath or whatever. And by the way, you got to remember to feed the Army too.
Yeah. For leadership style, before, during, and after a crisis, did you notice any changes?
Yeah, and that's another great question, and one that we should all reflect on. My style was pretty hands-on guy. I liked what I did, and I wanted to know what we were doing, and I wanted to make sure we represented it well, and that the right people were in the right jobs, and so on. And we did test our BCP. Actually, not only tested it, we had many other types of incidents that occurred where we did it, real time, and we knew that it worked pretty well. But what I realized very early on was that my team were ready for this, and they wanted that opportunity to step into those roles and do their jobs. And I have to say that my boss was a CFO, and he too was that way. And he had lots of other areas that were relevant under his purview that helped us. And then the HR and the communications and so on. But what change occurred for me is I was being inundated by all of not only the incident itself, what are we doing about it, communications, liaison with the FBI was a big part of this, and with Sony Corp management. But what I found was that there were not enough hours, truly were not enough hours in the day for me to deal with all of the stuff that was coming at us and try to make some sense out of it. And what I had to do was step back and let my team do the job they knew how to do. And that's the big change for me. I was there when they needed me, but I wasn't there the whole time because they delivered. They did a phenomenal job. But that's what I think is really, as I look back at my leadership style and changes, that one was really important because, they're already overwhelmed. They don't need me and they're grinding. They just need me when they need me. So big step.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. What were some of the, I guess, lingering impacts that occurred from the breach that you could speak to? Stuff that happened, afterwards.
Yeah. So when you make that decision to go dark, then, it's natural that you're going to be, every day having the conversation about, let's plug back in and let's get back to work. It is not that simple. If you don't even have a breach and somehow you go dark, you've got to look at your data and the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of it. Because when you do that, you're going to have some damage. Or maybe you have documents that end up in a different folder or file and you can't find them. So what we had to do is time everything and sequence everything. And so did it linger? Yeah, we were dark for weeks. Then we decided to replace all the equipment. No, some of the equipment was fried, but the one thing we did on day one when we recognized this Guardians of Peace had taken over the screens and that destruction was the intent, that if you were connected, you'd be destroyed. Your hard drive would be destroyed. But if you didn't plug in and turn on, then you probably could salvage what was on that hard drive, which became really important later. But we had to salvage it in a way that we created a different lab environment for that so that we didn't contaminate any or create other risk. So that was one that, this decision to come back. And then the other thing that you've got to do is, there is going to be a lessons learned. And so you really want to do that and be very prudent about that. Another one is that we had insurance. But you don't just say, hey, had a little incident, pay me. You have to articulate everything you did. Actually, everything you did before the incident. Were you in compliance with the terms and conditions of the insurance policies that you have or not? Because if you didn't do what you said, what they actually said you should do, why would they pay you? They probably won't. And I think that there's a huge concern I have with companies that say what you said earlier. Oh, I've got insurance and, you know, we back up to the cloud and I don't need to worry about it. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So one thing I always encourage in these day one planning sessions is have your risk management department bring every insurance policy to the room and redline everything in there that is a requirement of you. And then also look at what types of coverage do you have? You might not have cyber insurance, but you might have a KNR policy or a loss policy or a business interruption policy. Those are all really important as well. So you want that team to really deeply understand what it is you got to work with. And then I'll just give you one more example. In our crisis war room, I had one of my guys and his job became scribe. He actually took an 8.5 by 11 pad, mini pads, and created a legal privilege document and hand wrote all the decisions that were made. And I never saw those documents. Every day they went to our head of litigation and they were used for, you know, insurance claims and other types of litigation and what have you. And it was really a goldmine of information. But, you know, rather than to try to remember later on what you did or didn't do, that's a bad deal because it's not very defensible. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah, long time lingering effects. And you always want to get better and you never want to repeat. And the sad thing about ransomware today is we're starting to see more and more repeats.
Yeah. John, what are your thoughts? Going back to the cybersecurity insurance, I think that was interesting. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a great comment, Steven. There's a lot of clients of ours. We absolutely encourage them to not just read what's covered, because that's what insurance companies tend to focus on, but what they have to do, because that's how they can actually get compensated for the loss. Also, one thing that needs to happen to really respond to these potential loss and breach is making sure that your service providers, whether forensic companies or your third-party security companies, need to be added to the panel that your insurance are with in a prior, because otherwise insurance companies have to bring in another company that's already in the panel, and that's going to slow down the response, because now they have to come in and they have to relearn everything that they have. And why is it important? Because response is so important. I mean, every second counts during those crises. So having your third-party service providers to the panel is very, very important.
Thank you. Steven, I want to go back to the victims of a cybersecurity attack. I think often we always see it, insert company name in the headlines of the news, but it impacts more than just the company, right? So what were some of the impacts to employees?
Yeah, well, we're seeing in ransomware attacks, I'll give you an example and then I'll talk about Sony. When they attack healthcare providers and they go in and they're in for a while and they exfiltrate some data, and some of the data is actual Stevan Bernard's medical file and medical history. And maybe things in there that I just don't want disclosed. Maybe I have a mental health problem, whatever it is. They have that. And then they put the pressure back on that company to pay. And that company says, no, we're not going to pay. We backed up to the cloud, whatever. And then they actually are reaching out to individuals because they know how to get a hold of them. All the contact info is there. They're saying, you know what we're going to do? Can you believe that this company is not willing to pay the ransom to protect your data, we're going to expose it and you online. Then I will put pressure on that company to do something. So in our incident, we had employees, and by the way, I got to say this. I think a lot of companies feel that they've invested more than ever in cybersecurity, right? And protecting the data, and that it's reasonable. And I don't know where the line is from a standpoint of how much is enough, but I will say that as the bad guys get better, we need to get better. So it's never going to end from a standpoint of what it is we need to be doing with a continuous improvement model. But anyway, back to Sony. We had employees who were contacted and threatened that if we released that movie, bad things were going to happen. And so they tried to use that pressure and influence on some of our employees as well. And phishing, by the way, I got to say this, in the end, with all the great things you do, guess how they got in? Phishing, spear phishing. And they really, I give them credit. They did a lot of good things, smart things, but good things. And so, you know, as much time and effort as we put into safeguarding our perimeter and firewalls and all this stuff, you can still be vulnerable. But it does, on the victimization, you know, stop and ask yourself, if you had an incident, who all are the victims? And always remember that your employees are, whether you know it or not, they're feeling it. They're worried about it. And if you think about, you know, the nation state that attacked us, you know, what reach did they have beyond digital? That was another fear that people had. And, you know, AMC theaters refused to air the film because they had a 9/11 type of threat that said, that's what you're going to have happen at your theater if you show that movie. I mean, think about cyber attack and then the extent of it. And you know, we're seeing where people are actually being physically affected. In fact, there's a death in Dusseldorf where a hospital couldn't open to receive a guy. He had to go 20 miles away and he died en route. You know, I mean, so these attacks are becoming more and more threatening as well. And don't discount that.
Yeah, I remember reading that article. That was really interesting. John, did you have any thoughts on that question as well?
Oh, no, I think no comment there. I think Steven
okay.
all of them.
Steven, you mentioned, you know, they got in through spear phishing. So the insider threat is real. Do you think it's increasing?
Yeah, insider threat. Let's talk about that a moment. Absolutely, it's increasing. But let me qualify insider threat. I break it down two ways. One is the insider is someone, let's define that, someone that you have decided should have certain levels of access to certain things, right? Whether it's physical access or access to data or whatever it may be. You've given them the keys to the kingdom. Not everything, but some things. So that's an insider. And it could be a contractor, you know, a third party, even a fourth party, if you will, that has some type of access. And so what can they do? What can the insider do? The insider can do all kinds of things. But I want to say at Sony, you could say it was an insider because we had employees who clicked on the malware, the attachment, if you will, and allowed the malware in unknowingly. So that you could say, well, that was negligent. I don't know. I wouldn't say negligent. I think that's too strong a word. It was naive because we didn't, at the time, didn't have an anti-phishing program where we educated, you know, people on that. But it's a tough one. Did that help? Is there more to it you wanted me to comment on?
No, I think that You spoke to it well.
Well, the
John?
the other part of insider threat. So there's naivety, and then there's intent, right? So those are two different things. Naivety is, I was negligent, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay, that's one. The other one is, I intended to cause you some kind of harm. And so, you know, people in our attack, people around the world were saying, oh, there's no way that this could have happened if it didn't involve an insider in Sony. Well, actually, by bringing in the Bureau and Mandiant and others, we were able to prove it was not an insider. It never was. And they didn't need to have an insider. Spear phishing worked. So anyway.
Thank you.
A great comment. Yeah, a couple comments there to add to what Steven said. There was a Wall Street Journal research done in the middle of the pandemic, and it was among 400 companies and executives, and 67% of them, that they were very concerned about malicious employees and insider threats, the enemy within, right? Also, during the pandemic, especially in the Department of Homeland Security, they expanded their insider threat program, ITP, to include not just employees who have a clearance, but that expanded to any extended workforce and partner community. So to echo what Steven mentioned, the insiders that we used to define as somebody who are employees of the company, it's expanding drastically because what's been changing with this decentralized workforce and service providers who have access to the inside. Now that's considered insider as well. I believe ThreatPost had a really good the data on this. And when you ask companies, how you feel about insider threats and vulnerabilities, about 82% companies that they're not prepared. And right now, the behavior analytics is taking center stage as a crucial weapon in fight against insider threats. It's been increasing, especially during pandemic. And this is really worrisome for many companies in our client base.
John, if I can add one more comment on insider threat. Dylan, when you asked, is it increasing? Here's another way it's increasing. Radicalism, idealism, mental health, those are all now factors that are much more prevalent, if you will, than perhaps ever before. And it's, I don't want to be political here. I mean, but you know, the country is a little bit divided over the election. Okay. But there's also, people are suffering, and mental health is a real problem that I think companies are going to have to do more with and to better understand and to try to help, because, you know, some of the resources that were available through government before may not be as available today. But that doesn't mean you don't reach out and you don't understand and you don't try to help and you don't look at the warning signs and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So we do have a couple questions from the audience I'd like to pose to you, Steven and John. We'll go with this one first. How important is it to differentiate between a business contingency plan, or I think they're looking for here is maybe like an incident response? How does the organization respond to a crisis now, and a business continuity plan?
Yeah, and there is a distinction. Let me share one thing that I didn't mention before. One of the things I really liked about our program is that we also had an IAT. The IAT is the Incident Assessment Team. So if you imagine, you know, the nature of our business, we were constantly, you know, under attack, if you will, and having to analyze not only in cyber, but, you know, we had executives being robbed and beaten in different parts of the world, and, you know, we had death threats against talent, and the list is very long, right? And so I think we did a really good job of you know, dealing with that. But the continuity of the business, I like the question, because what you should be doing is having a separate dialogue about how are you going to have the continuity of the business and assure it while you're dealing with the crisis. And don't, as best you can, separate one from the other. Really important. Anyway, our IAT would do a preliminary assessment. Then we would decide whether or not to activate the crisis team, and then, come together and do what we needed to do. And I really like that model, because otherwise you're constantly bringing the crisis team together, and you do that too many times, you're going to wear out the rubber on the road. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thank you. Here's another question from the audience. What risk do you have in declaring victory too early and thinking you resolved the issue? How do you know for sure it won't happen again, or another wave is not coming?
Risk you have with that is your instincts are to do exactly that. Let's get past this. I think we're good. I had the general counsel of a large company contact me last month. They were under a ransomware attack, and he had left a lot of the responsibility to his CIO to run it, and also to make that decision. And I said, there has to be accountability here. That decision needs to be well documented and articulated, and you need to probe it. You need to put holes in it. You need to challenge it, because once you do come back, if you come back and they get you again, I'm telling you, the second time is far worse than the first time. So that's my view, is don't rush to judgment. Don't get in too big of a hurry. I understand why you want to do that, but really be cautious on that. Ask the right questions.
Yeah, what we see dealing with some of the crisis and threats with some of the customers, threat hunting becomes part of the aftermath exercise. And really we haven't really seen a step where they declare a victory per se, because this is going to be continuous threat and vulnerability management. I think to answer the question is the false sense of security. Potentially complaints can set on, or you think that your job is done when it's actually not. Threats are everywhere, or attack surface are only expanding. So I think it's mindset is the most powerful weapon that we have against our adversarial criminal groups out there. So I think having that sense of urgency and almost preparedness is the most important thing.
Thank you. This is a question for both of you, Stevan and John. We keep seeing it in the news, new attacks all the time. Do we expect there to be this continuing increase of attacks from nation state actors with a lot more resources than like a script kiddie? And what do you think we could be doing differently to counter this kind of cyber risk?
The answer, in my view, is, are we going to see more? Oh boy. Yes, we are. Why? Because it's lucrative and with little risk. Why is there little risk? Because I think I just read 6 of the top ransomware gangs in the world, those individuals live in Russia. So does that mean that Russia, the nation state, is behind it? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't have to. What it does mean is that, in essence, they've provided a safe harbor. So as long as these guys don't harm their host nation, I think they can pretty well do what they want, because we don't have an extradition treaty with Russia anyway. So, and that's just one example. There are many. Nation state capabilities have seriously increased in their military contingency planning, right? From a cyber standpoint. North Korea today, the Lazarus Group is stronger than ever. They're doing all kinds of things. And if you don't understand what they're up to, take a look, because they're not afraid to tackle any target, including government. So what's going to happen, in my view, is already happening. And that is that we realize that both in government and private sector, we've got to tighten up. We've got, old legacy systems that haven't been patched. We've got all kinds of things that really need more attention. And I think, by the way, at the end of this, we've got a handout that's got a lot of reasonable things you can do that don't cost a fortune to do them. It's changing behavior and habit and creating a sense of urgency. And that's what we need to do. And we need to partner more with our government and have more information sharing. So CISA and NIST are organizations that really offer a lot to whoever. The FBI's InfraGard program. So it's within reach, that we can get better. And that's the goal, is to get better. But what I also think is going to happen is, I'll use the term loosely, but we're going to see more diplomacy between countries. Biden did have a conversation with Putin at G7 about this. And while Putin didn't, admit anything, he heard it. And I think other countries are going to do more to pressure. So John, let me stop and let you jump in.
No, great comment, Steven. Yeah, in my opinion, there has to be treaty among all the major nations in the world to really come together and have globally enforceable law about this cyber criminals. Same way the anti-money laundering, that's enforceable between banks. Why can we have that? And I think that one of the things that we can learn from healthcare providers who put their lives in front of everybody else during this pandemic is that healthcare providers are so much better, in my opinion, sharing information, open threats, stats, both government and provider sectors. I think there's a room for cyber community to have more of an open exchange platform about threats without potentially, giving themselves more liability or exposing to more liabilities. So I think that's one area that we can do. And lastly, be active in community, like Steven's doing. You're sharing this word of wisdom and your experience with the community since that horrible breach. And I think that's something that we can continue to do to promote awareness.
Okay. Well, thank you both. We're running a little low on time here, so I'm going to pass it back to Eileen to get us wrapped up. Thank you both again.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us again, Mr. Stevan Bernard. We really appreciated having you. Thank you, John Shen and Dylan Kelsey, for participating in this webinar. We will be reaching out tomorrow via email with some key takeaways and with some additional resources and ways to get in touch. If we did not get to your question, then we'll reach out to you over email for that as well. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.